We've had a heap of rain over the last fortnight. I want to talk to you about how to fish the runoff, the types of lures to use, the locations, and the gear that you're going to need if you want to get after your first big Gold Coast Barra. Let's get into it. Right, so the first thing I want to do is take you through how I like to fish these sections. With this big dumping rain that we've had, probably the most effective place to fish is areas where you've got these big runoff drains, pouring over banks, or areas where these rock walls have got water that's just feeding out of the streets into the canals and into the lakes. And this is what you're looking for. You're after this foamy water. They say foam is home, and it's true with these Barra. As soon as this starts to run, those first couple of days is your prime time to target these big Barra. And usually you want it running a bit heavier than this. So this morning it's just starting to fade. We had a little bit of rain overnight, but it's been racing a lot heavier than this during the week. That's when you want to be on it, when it's fully pumping out. If you can get a lure down and you can fish it, then that's the prime time, because it's the same time that all the carnage, all the bait and everything is washing out, and the fish are in that frenzied feeding mode. So you're looking for this water movement. And most of the places you're trying to find are areas like the backs of lakes, where they have the big drains, the huge culverts that pour water into the areas like that. They've got them in the rivers around the Gold Coast as well. Coomera and Nerang, even Currumbin, Talabudra have got them, and there's Barra in all of them. You've just got to go around and find these areas. You can do it on Google Maps, so looking for tiny little hairline drains that run into a lake. When we get this big downpour, they start to pour water in, and that's what you're looking for. Driving around areas and just looking into the canals for that dirty water, those big plumes of muddy water, that's what you're looking for. Let me take you through the way that I like to fish these areas and how I'll target them with lures, and then sit down and go through the different types of lures and the gear that I'm using. There's a whole range of lures, but at the moment when it starts to slow down like this, I love to use these big prawns. This is one of these big Chase Baits flip prawns. I'll show you the pack that they come in just really quickly. That's what you're looking for in the shops. This is like a 125, so it's the bigger size because you want that big presence in the dirty water. And all that I'm doing is, when I approach one of these spots, I'm looking for the most water movement. So the area where there's the most water pouring in, it's kind of like a hierarchical sitting system for these big Barra, and they'll sit off to the side or underneath the main area where the most water's coming in. When I arrived this morning, I stopped my motor way back. Even though there's a lot of noise in this sort of rapids or the waterfalls and the pouring out drainage, I like to stop way further back and just motor in, cruise in real cruisy. And I'm even having casts on the way in along the periphery just to see if there's any fish that have sort of pushed back to the edge of the feeding zone. And then as I approach it and start to hone in on the target, I'm looking for the main areas of runoff. There's another drain off to the left here, but this is the main zone here. My first couple of casts is right into the base of where it basically hits the surface of the water. So I'm just pumping casts up in there, and I'll throw 10 or 15 casts in there. And with one of these prawns, I'm just working it back super slow, and I'm watching my line for any little flick or tick, and usually it's going to come in that first couple of meters. If there's feeding Barra in there, like hard feeding Barra, it's that first couple of meters where you come down from the rapids, things start to slow, and your lure might be just getting out of that main water movement. That's where they're sitting, just idling underneath all that water, waiting for the bait to come out of the edges of it. You might be able to see the bait flicking in there now, like it's just a melting pot of bait. Once I've smashed all the rapids and the noisy stuff, I start to fish those little edges, and you can see there's like a foam water line. Hopefully you can pick that up over the back there. And that's really where I reckon these barra tend to sit. They sort of sit off to the edge or underneath the main water movement. They're not in there fighting the rapids the whole time when it's slowed down like this. They're off to the sides. And so you're trying to bring it along the edge of that foam water line. So perfect example, if you can see it here. There's a foam water line that comes out along here. That little line there is where I'm trying to get my lure to track down along. So I'm flicking along this foam line, and I'm usually just pointing my rod tip at my lure so that any little suck, once that little bit of line gets sucked into the barra's mouth, then it's going to tighten and I can set the hook. And then really slow winding. You don't want to do it too quick, you want to give them plenty of time to find it. It's super dirty in there, really noisy, it's hard to pick stuff up. So you want something with a big presence like this big Chase Baits foot prawn, or I'll go through all the other lures in a sec, like these big paddling soft plastics. Ideally you want to stay back from the zone. Sort of drifted in a bit closer and working on the camera, but you want to stay back from the area, you don't want to spook it. And if you've got your scanning unit, you probably just want to have a couple of passes after you've hit it. I generally won't. Somewhere like this, I'm pretty well convinced that there's going to be fish here, especially in the first week of that runoff. So I won't pass it and go up and down and search first. I'll throw into a zone like this and give it half an hour before I go and check. But you can definitely use your scanning unit if you've got a side scan. You want to be sort of sitting off and just patrolling and seeing if there's barra coming through or sitting in there. So you really don't want to be in there spooking the barra and all over the top of them with your motor. They're really wary once you're in on top of them, and they can shut down if you're just motoring around trying to get hooks off and things like that. So a weedless presentation like that is the way that I go, especially when it's starting to sort of calm down, it's getting a little bit quieter. That's my preference bait in front of, you know, something like a big paddling swim bait or something that I'll use when there's a lot more water movement and you're trying to get that presence in there. So once you find these spots, it's really just about being patient enough and just punishing every little section, any little area where there's like a back eddy or one of those foam lines, or even down underneath if you can get a lure and just a heavier weight to get down through those rapids and then bring it underneath that top water movement. You're just trying to be consistent and methodical, work across it, work back across, underneath it, find the little pockets of structure where they could be sitting, like even in behind those little branches there, they might just be sitting out of the current in a little spot where they can pull up and not have to work too hard. And most of the time for me, it's just a really slow retrieve back. As long as you've got the legs on your prawn going, or the tail just slowly moving, or a big paddle tail just working side to side with a body roll, that's enough for these barra to be convinced in these conditions and to have a go. So it's these drains, it's the big culvert drains, like the runoff drains, even areas like bridges where it's all pouring in through a bridge, like at the base of a bridge. They're great zones to be chasing these big barra during this time. And if you've got areas like, there's a lot of canals that have lakes that have got big water movement, and then it comes through a small little area like that where it's a squeeze point and there's bridges like the pylons are through there, it's another great area where they just sort of hold up behind those pylons. I filmed it in Monster Jacks. There's scenes in there where I filmed these big barra just sitting down there. The other places you can go and hit too are these freshwater lakes, areas where there's fresh water, you can get into barra like that. And I did that in Gold Coast, Kayaker's Guide to the Gold Coast. I dropped a massive barra up in those Robina lakes up the back there. So areas where there's big pooling water and it kind of pushes onto itself, if they come together, like little zones where the water sort of joins forces and it gets running really hard, you pick those little corner pockets where it's not too fast, just out of the main run. All right, let's get into the lures and the gear. I'll talk you through what I like to use. I get the feeling there is a whole heap to talk about on this topic, and there's too much to cover in one video. I'm going to forget some stuff, so make sure you put in the comments any questions you've got. This audience, the followers on my lure box, the subscribers now, are fantastic. They're commenting on each other's comments and helping each other out, so you guys are doing an awesome job. If you've got questions, chuck them in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you. If not, there'll be someone else that does. So let's get into it. The first things that I want to go through are just some of the lures that you want to be throwing, and then we'll get into some of the tactics, the gear, and I definitely need to talk on just how to go about looking after the fish and the reason why the fish is still here and growing in numbers. So we'll get into that as well. My preference really is to use big swim baits, and having a big presence in the water, especially during these really dirty conditions, I just think gives you a bit more of an advantage than using something too small and undergunning yourself. So things like this big lure from Mollix. This is a big 185 shad that's been let go by Mollix, released in the last couple of seasons, and it comes with like a big underspinner, huge treble sitting down at the bottom, which is the way that a lot of the big Barra tournament guys tend to rig these things. It's got an internal weight like this and a great big exposed hook. You can see the presence on that. Looks like a big mullet, and that's what the Barra are feeding on, especially around this runoff and this dirty water. You'll see the mullet sort of pushing in there, trying to get in on the action, and that's what they're trying to get onto most of the time. So something like this big thing from Mollix, it's a 7.5 inch swim bait. That's it there, that's what you're looking for in the shops. I really like these sort of white sides, or if you can get greens and things like that, that gold flex, alright, stuff like that. That's really what I'm using when I'm trying to fish around these big runoff drains. You can use these around pontoons as well. I tend to take this back spinner off and I just replace it with like a single or whatever. If you're fishing sort of clearer waters in not runoff conditions, big swim baits like this, I think, are probably the best way to go to set yourself apart from, getting the bycatch and getting smaller fish come out to hit your lures. So even things like, I've had hits on this big pedo along the side of pontoons, these extra pedos, and they're a massive bait. You can see that there, like how big are they? They must be up near that 7-8 inches. So something like that with that massive big tail on the back, I've done some reviews on these over the last season or so. That looks like a huge mullet. It's got a big body roll on it, a huge thumping tail, big presence, and beside the pontoons, that's been effective for me in the past. You can use those hollow bellies as well. These have been around for a long time. They've come back in from Berkeley, have re-released them, and these have got to be one of the stayers for Barra fishing. And I just like to rig them with an internal head weight, so something like that you can kind of massage into position and sit inside the body of the bait. It's got a big exposed hook, and you can use different hooks for these. These are like 5/8 of an ounce hooks that I think Mustard have got, or you can get them like this from the big slick rigs. I just pull them out of big slick rigs from Squidgy, and I massage them into position on these. So you can run an underside treble with these as well if you want, or a stinging treble to try and help with your hookup rate. But these Berkeley hollow bellies in the 5 and 6 inch are a really good option as well for soft-bodied swim baits. Some of the big lures that have come into the game in the last couple of seasons are these jointed swim baits. They're a hard bait, but you can see they've got these joins in them. And this is an Australian design one that Matt Fraser from Barramundi Lures has released. That is a perfect imitation of a big potty mullet. It comes standard with these great big hooks, beautiful big gauge hooks that you can use for Barra, and these have got a fantastic swimming action on them. And they've also got these side fins here that sort of pull it down. So if you're trying to get down underneath it, you can put interchangeable weights in these and get it down through the rapids and then retrieve it underneath everything like I was talking about earlier. You can fish them along the sides of pontoons. One of my good mates, Brock Perry, he's been using big swim baits and targeting Barra, and he does quite well on the Gold Coast, chasing Barra and big mangrove jack, and he uses big swim baits. So things like this Gantia, this has got to be one of my favourite swim baits. Just the appeal, just the look on it, that super soft tail and the action on this thing with a suspending, just a stall. Boy, I love these things. They don't miss you. They get you in where it hurts, because I think they're over $50. But something like that with that profile, just like a big mullet, is what you're after. And for me, I'm not really keen to hedge and try and use a cheaper, less appealing lure, because I'm just going for that glory fish and that one-off fish. And if I get hit and I lose something, lose a ganty or whatever, it does sting, but I think it's the only way to go is to use the exact bait that you want to fish with. A jointed glide bait is also a really good option, especially if it's got like a suspend or a slow sink. And something like this, have a look at the finish on that. Perfect like a mullet or a whiting. And you can upgrade the trebles from the way they come out of the packet. But using one of these with a slow roll and a pause, just sitting them around these areas, in around the runoff, around the drains, along the pontoons and pylons, if you game, these can be an effective bait to throw for these barra as well. So you might get the feeling like from the baits that I'm throwing, they're really big, and the reason for it is to try and weed out any of the bycatch. Like, you don't want brim, estuary cod, trevally. You're trying to get rid of them. Even the smaller mangrove jack, if you're going to have a go for these barra, you really want to be throwing a bigger profile bait to get away from that, so that the barra sees the big mullet profile, comes out, and that's the thing that they're after. You also want to have some upgrading trebles. So I love BKK Raptors. These are some heavy fangs, but these things by owner, these, I think they're 58 TNs, STX 58 TNs. They're a 3 times strong owner hook, and these have got to be one of the sharpest and best, I reckon. They're not super big gauge, like they're not a really heavy gauge for the strength you get in them, but they're certainly strong enough, and they're super sharp. So these ones and the BKK Raptors, these would be my pick, or these fangs in the bigger sizes. Look, the other thing as well, like guys that have been chasing mangrove jack over the years, and even more now, are getting this bycatch of barra, and they tend to be using things like jackal squirrels, lucky craft pointers. So you're still going to be able to do it with lures like this. If you're not in the game for going and throwing around and fishing and buying big swim baits, then you can certainly do it with lures like this, or these cheaper sort of paddle tail big shad style lures. So these ones I tend to fish with a real stall and a slow roll, not as super aggressive as I use these things for mangrove jack. I tend to try and use my scanning unit. I've got a small hummingbird scanning unit. I'm constantly looking at that, trying to eye in where these barra are sitting, seeing if I can find them, and then sitting these in their noses or around their faces. A smaller, I showed you I think it's like a 185, a smaller 140 or even 100 size in these mollick shads. These things are just fantastic. They've got a big paddling tail, and I think when the runoff finishes, if you want to go after these barra around some of those bigger structures like pontoons and pylons and jetties and things like that, or if you know some zones, like some areas where they go and bait themselves up in these canals, the 100 size in this is a pretty reasonable way to go, or a 140. Okay, and you don't need to have that spinner on the back. They love those in the dams at times for a big presence and that sort of thing, but I've even had barra take me on little flick prawns. I've been fishing for brim before, and the little 70mm squidgy flick prawns or flick baits, I've had a nice big barra take me on that. It was on 4 pound though, so it only lasted a couple of minutes and then it was all over. But they will take a regular lure that you're going after, trevally with, but to get your chances up so you're not getting all that bycatch, I tend to go really big. And to go much bigger, your gear needs to be a bit bigger to be a realistic shot at them. So let me take you through some of the stuff that I use for them. I fished with this flick prawn this morning in and around some of these drains, and that's another lure, these bigger prawn lures that have got a beautiful tail action on them. These are a great option as well. And I love the weedless setup. I've done reviews on a heap of prawns over the last couple of months, and these things are just as good for barra. A lot of the guys that fish in southeast Queensland up at the sunny coast do really well around the big docks and pontoons with these things as well. Around the pylons and bridges and in some of the lakes and the drains that feed the lakes, they fish with these things and do really well. So around the big boats is another one, and pylons and bridges where there's big lights and shadow lines and things like that, fishing with something like this The barra love to sit just with their noses into that light where they can pick up on bait. Fishing with something like that might be a really good option as well. And they tend to do it at night, obviously, so they're targeting those light lines where there's these shadow lines, or big beaming lights off pontoons that are lit up at night. So around these canals there's a heap of options, and it's just about putting in the time. I think it's got to be way harder than jack fishing at the moment to actually go and target barra on the Gold Coast, but there's guys that are doing it and they're getting some fish. This time when we've had runoff is the way to go. That's why I put the video together, just in case you get an itch and you want to go do it. Alright, so the gear that I'm using, this is a big swim baiting rod, and this is a fairly heavy rod by Storm. You can see the size on it. It's a lot more cumbersome, and I'm running it with, this is an Abu that I got from Duncan from Australian Reel Repairs. He put a big drag system, fully customised this, so that I've got a really smooth high-end drag, and I'm running 30-pound braid to I think this is a 40 or 50-pound leader. So it's big gear, and I think that's the way you're going to have your best shot. If you're going to go and put the time in and you finally get that bite, doing something like you would for mangrove jack, like 2020, you're a lot less of a chance of actually converting and getting the fish in. So fishing with probably at least 30-pound braid and then at least a 40-pound leader would be the bottom of the market for me, the way that I get into it. The other thing that you can do, you don't have to go out and get a swim baiting rod. That's definitely not what this is about. This video is not about going out and buying a whole heap of new gear. You can go and chase them with your basic, like your jack setup, and have a bit of a go and fish some of those lighter swim baits or those soft-bodied swim baits and try and get it done like that. But the big difference for me when I'm doing this is I use a heavier leader. So where have I got it? I just use stuff like this, like a 60-pound Black Magic hard leader, and I'm fishing a lot slower and just being as patient as I can. I rarely use my scanning unit on my sounder, but when I'm chasing barra, I tend to sort of go and patrol as well and look for areas. And if I've had an area or a pontoon where I've seen barra in the past, I'm constantly just punishing that with more casts than I generally would for a jack. Usually for a jack I'll go and use maybe three casts on a pontoon. When I'm chasing these barra and I know that I've seen them in those spots before or been hit there, I'll pump that for like 20 casts and just try and annoy the barra. That's one of the tactics that I've picked up from guys up north. I need to share my sentiments with you about looking after these fish. There's a reason why the numbers are here that they are. Some people have released small barra into the Robina lakes, like their aquarium barra, and they've certainly contributed to the numbers. I think that some have come down from up north. I've heard stories of tagged fish out of a Wonga coming down, but they're all up and down the coast of Queensland now. And the reason why we've still got good numbers is because the guys that have been targeting them, especially early on, and getting some of these fish in these main areas, they release them all. They look after them and they release them all. So if you're going to sort of listen to some of these tactics, I really hope that you do the right thing and release your fish, look after them and throw them back. And if you're after a feed of barra, go to the fish shop and get some. These fish in the Gold Coast are a real prized, treasured possession by a lot of the sports fishermen. And that's my alarm to get into school. So I think we need to do the right thing when we're not sure how many are really around, and look after them, get a quick photo if you can, and then release them in good nick. So that's my feelings on it, and I know there's a lot of guys that share the same feelings. Even talking about Gold Coast Barra, I reckon some people be like, oh, Johnny, I don't know, mate. Don't show your spots, don't go showing my spots. That's why I've tried to keep it fairly diplomatically sound as to where I'm going and showing you, because it's more about you guys finding these spots for yourself and working it out for yourself. That's the adventure of the whole thing. But I hope these tips have helped you. You're looking for these drains, you're looking for high traffic bait zones like you are with mangrove jack. The big pontoons and big boats that hold big bait under big cover, that's the kind of place that you're looking to start. But I sort of tend to only go after them when there's this runoff period and you've got this high amount of fresh coming in and you've got those big feeding windows. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts on Gold Coast Barra fishing. Hopefully you're going to get out there and have a go. It's bloody tough going. You've got to be basically crazy to get into it. But I think it's something worth trying. Change up, challenge your fishing, give yourself something to look forward to and dream about at night. Try some bigger baits and try, you know, something that's a little bit more of a challenging lure to fish, and see how you get on. Alright, hope you enjoyed this tactics video. I'll see you in the next one.